Angie Flynn. I'm the Director of School Counseling here at Shrewsbury High School. Tonight is our college application nuts and bolts. We're going to start out with a slideshow. We're going to go through a bunch of different slides on the process, and then there will be breakout sessions at the end, and you will break out into small groups based on your student's counselor. We're going to hold all of the questions until the end, and then also you can ask the questions in a more smaller, intimate setting in the breakout sessions as well. All right, so I'm going to introduce all of the counselors here at Shrewsbury High School. They're over here and they'll just stand up and give a wave. So our newest counselor, who is first year here, is Mr. Greg Silva, Mr. Frank Flynn, Mrs. Jamie Lucier, Mr. Sean Russell, Miss Susie Ariel, Ms. Tammy Young, Mr. Lee Dimatopoulos, and Mrs. Jessica Rice. And we put the caseloads up here so you can see who your student's counselor is. So before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of the college application process, I just wanted to give a plug of how we get our communication out there in the school counseling department. So bi-monthly newsletters, I send out a counselor connection newsletter. The first one should go out sometime next week, and then it'll be, September, October issue, and November, December, etc. Anything that's really pertinent information, I'll also send out in an email. So we'll send emails out through PowerSchool. We also have an Instagram account where we post lots of different fun events or different things that are going on. So I really encourage you, if you're on Instagram, find us and follow us. There's our handle up there. We also have a website. On the Shrewsbury High School website, we have a school counseling website. I'm just going to show you quickly. If you go to the website, we have our school counseling department here. And if you click here, we have lots of different resources in this. Senior information, junior information, all different sorts of resources that will be helpful. And then if you have students in the 9th and 10th grade, we also hold counselor connection presentations. These are held on Friday mornings from 8 to 9. Here's a list of them this year and the Fridays that they're happening. So the first one is October 14th. This is sort of like an introduction to high school. What does high school mean? And this will be from 8 to 9 in the presentation room. I'll also send all of this out on email as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Frank Flynn, and he's going to go through some of the subjects with us.
All right. Evening, everybody. The first thing we'll focus in on here is SCORE, which really serves two purposes for our students and then our staff as well. So SCORE is our college and career planning tool. Most students, if not all students, should be pretty familiar with this. If not, you soon will be, obviously, especially if you're in this application process. And then for us, it's how we send our supporting documents to our schools. So I'm going to run through a couple features here and just kind of show you where some of these things are quickly. So each student has a SCORE account, and right here you'll see this is what it looks like from the student's perspective. I'm under the colleges tab right now, so all students in here, at this point, or soon enough, you'll be starting to organize your college list, right? And just from like an organizational perspective, we recommend getting all your schools that you're looking into applying into that following tab, as you can see right here, right? You may have schools that have been suggested to you. You can also filter up this list as well. If there's schools you're no longer interested in applying to as well, you can remove them too. Down the road, when you meet with your counselor, and Mrs. Young and Mrs. Rice will talk about the transcript request process a little bit later on, these schools will be converted into the applied column. It helps our registrar and our secretaries know which schools you are applying to and that we've moved them from the fall into the applied list. When you meet with your counselor, you'll go all over this during the transcript request process as well. A couple features to keep in mind here. In regards to letters of recommendation, I want to say it is application documents. So this should look familiar to students who requested official letters of recommendation. Click on this tab. If you have those already confirmed, right, you've already had those conversations with teachers, you've gotten the okay from them. This is the formal recommendation, which would send them the link through SCORE to upload to your SCORE account, which would then, down the road, allow us to send these letters to the colleges. Okay, so if I start typing in a name, they populate right there. And what needs to be sent in that message, it could be, something vague. Dear Mr. Collins, hope the school year's off to a good start. I wanted to thank you again for writing my letter of recommendation. I'll be sure to follow up in the distant future, right? This is something that we're encouraging our students to do now, especially if some of you have those earlier deadlines in November, or some of you even in October, right? So this is a big part of the process, and the formal request is done through that way. Another thing to pay attention to, right, which helps our students get an understanding of kind of determining what schools are, and I'll mention it too, likely, targeted, realistic type of options for you, right? Our scattergrams are a great resource for you to become aware of. This information is based off of all students from Shrewsbury High School since 2010 who've applied to schools, right? So it really allows you to see which schools are realistic options for you, and it forces you to kind of be honest about the whole process, right? There really shouldn't be surprises, although we obviously can't predict admissions decisions. This points you in the right direction, really help narrowing that list down. Some other features in here are the bio survey. So if I go here, the cheeseburger bar, what we call it, there's a surveys tab, and there's a bio survey for your counselor. So many of you have probably already completed teacher bio sheets for the letter of recommendation process. For our evaluation, we require the same thing, right? And what I communicate to my students, obviously, aside from knowing you personally, and the relationship we've had for 4 years, the more information that you provide us with on the bio survey, the more we're able to explain in our evaluation, right? So teachers are writing you probably in a content area in the class that you took with them, right? Obviously, and they know you on a personal level as well. We're hitting on the academics, but we're really trying to highlight who you are outside of the classroom too. And the last component I just want to touch base with is the college info sessions that are here at the high school. So if I go under the tab events and deadlines, these are all the schools that are coming for information sessions at Shrewsbury High School, right? I'm not going to go through all of them. We have roughly since, I don't know, like mid-September is when the schools started to come, roughly between like 60 to 70 schools who come for information sessions, right? So it's a great way for you to get questions answered directly from that college. Many times that person who comes for that information session is actually the rep who's going to be reading your application, right? So it's an awesome opportunity to put a name to a face. So we highly recommend taking advantage of that opportunity. We even have schools that come that aren't necessarily local, right? I think one of the schools on here that you can see is USC, right? I mean, clearly not right down the road at all, right? So it's a great opportunity. So definitely take a look at this so you aside from those official campus visits, you get these kind of more personal information sessions. Some college admission trends that we've noticed in the past couple of years. Applications have increased. Total number of applicants submitted increased by 22%. Number of college applicants has increased by 13%, and college waitlists have lengthened, right? To kind of summarize that, more students are applying to college and more students are applying to more colleges. Those wait lists are getting longer too, right? So this is really important in terms of helping you really target schools that are fits for you, right? And that dives into how many, right? It could be on an average 5 to 9, right? There are some students that apply for just 5. There's some that are 9. Some are more than 9. Some are a little bit less than 5, right? And we break them down into reach, target, likely, and safeties, right? I think at the end of the day, what I tell my students is when you're getting close to that deposit deadline, you want to feel like you have options, right? You want to feel like you're deciding on where you're going, right? And you're weighing out the social, the financial, and the academic fits. The hypothetical scenario that I play out with my students all the time is, say you apply to 10 schools and you get into 5, right? You shouldn't be focused on the 5 rejections that you've gotten. It's the 5 acceptances that you've gotten, right? You have 5 options at that point, and it's up to you individually and as a family to look at those from an academic perspective. Academically, is the right fit for you? Do they have the major, obviously, that you're looking for? And if you're not going, decide, do they have potential options that you have interest in? Socially, is it the right fit for you, right? If you're going to be potentially living there for 4 years, you want to be comfortable there, right? It's somewhere where you want to feel like you belong there. And then financially, right? This is a huge component as well. In talking with students, maybe at this point in the process, it's not, number 1 priority, but when you got to put a deposit down and when you get that financial package back, it's a critical component of this whole entire process, right? So really weighing out of all those 3 options, kind of what the best option is for you is super important in helping you decide eventually where you want to go. Turn it over.
All right. All right, so for the actual components of the application process, these are all the things that students will be responsible for. So the application itself, their essays, resume if it applies to them, standardized tests, so taking the SAT or ACT, as well as asking for letters or recommendations. So in terms of the types of application systems students will use, the biggest one is Common App, or Common Application, and then if students are not using that, the other ones are typically the school-specific application sites. But no matter which one you're using, it's pretty similar in that students will have an area for all the general information. They will have an area for school-specific questions about their majors, activities list section, and then there'll also be areas for students to submit any supplemental essays or writings. Something really important for students to keep in mind, because of Common App plus any school's application sites, and then once you submit, colleges will send you accounts. It is going to be very important that students have some way to keep track of all those usernames and passwords and the account, the links on there. So whether it's a spreadsheet, a Google Doc, or something that's secure that you know you can go back to, keep track of all of your account information. And this is probably the most popular question that students ask, and probably the most popular question that will come out tonight too, is we're living in a test optional world. What does that mean for you as a student or for you as a parent? Should you send your test scores or should you go test optional? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer for this. If you as a student or family, you're thinking about what to do about test optional, we encourage students to speak with their school counselor and come up with a plan to see what's the best fit for them. Because one student might send their scores to one institution, but a different student might not. So it's very individualized. And then if you do decide to send your test scores, a lot of colleges do have the option of score choice, which means that students have the option to choose which test scores that they can send. So if you took it once or twice or 3, or if you're really ambitious, you took it more, you can choose to send just one or all of them or just a few. And then another important thing to know about test scores itself is that us as your school counselors, the registrar, we will not send any scores to anyone. It is the student's responsibility to make sure that they send their test scores, whether it's the SAT or ACT. So students need to send that to colleges or universities. If there's a scholarship agency that is asking for test scores, they'll need to send it to them as well. NCAA, students will need to send those scores as well. So if students are sending SAT scores, they will do that through the College Board website. And if it's ACT scores, it will be done through the ACT website. I thought it was an ice cream truck. I got really excited. I'm still lactose intolerant, but fun memories. All right, back to non-fun things. So if you are thinking about taking an SAT or ACT, these are the future dates that will meet the deadlines for those January regular deadlines. If you're looking to take a test at Shrewsbury High School, the ones that we offer are the October and November SAT. If you're thinking about December SAT or any of the ACTs, those will have to be taken at a different school. And then the registrations for the October SAT and ACT have already passed. So if you haven't gone to those, then I would recommend trying the November or December tests. And then in general, October test scores, by the time they come out, it's generally will meet the deadline for November, any like November early action deadlines. And then for letters of recommendation, so as Mr. Flynn said, your counselor will write a letter of recommendation, and we ask that students complete the file survey on SCORE, and also to meet with us. For teacher recommendations, we encourage students to follow the directions from the colleges, which is typically 1 or 2 letters from a teacher. This is one of those cases that more is not better. If they tell you 2, just send 2. Don't worry about like, oh, I can send 3 or 4 because they'll increase my chances. They might not read the 3rd or the 4th one. And then for some students, they might have what's considered a supplemental recommendation. So supplemental rec letters could be from coaches, outside tutors, if you have a job, like a job supervisor, grade level administrators, their recommendation letters would be considered supplemental. If you have a case where you want to submit a supplemental rec letter, talk with your counselor about it first because there are some cautions with this. The first is that a supplemental rec letter does not replace a counselor or a teacher rec letter. And also colleges will choose what they want to read. So if they say that the minimum or the maximum they want to see is 2 teachers, 1 counselor, they might not read that supplemental rec letter. So definitely have a conversation with your counselor if you're looking at a supplemental rec letter. And then as a general rule of thumb, whoever is going to be your recommender, please give them at least 1 month prior to your first deadline. So if your first deadline is November 1st, ideally ask them by October 1st. If your first deadline is January 1st, maybe ask them at the end of November to take into account holidays. That way it's less anxiousness for you as a student, and then your recommender also has more time to write a good quality letter for you. And then these are just for admission options. These are the different types of deadlines that students will come across. So on the non-restrictive side, we have regular decision, rolling admission, and early action. These are non-restrictive because students don't have a limit in how many they can apply to. And then on the restrictive application plans, there's early decision and then restrictive early action. With early decision, this is the only one out of all 5 of these that is binding. So what this means is that if a student chooses to apply to a school under early decision, they are telling that school that you are my first choice and you are my top choice. If you accept me, I'm enrolling 100%. And I will withdraw every other application. I will reject every other offer. So because this is a binding decision, students, it's not a good fit for all students because there's a lot of considerations between financial aspects. Are you ready to make this commitment to that school? So definitely think it over before saying, I'm going to do early decision. You can only choose 1 school to early decision if you do decide to go down that route. And then the other plan is restrictive early action. This one is not as popular, not as common rather, but like early decision, students can only pick 1 school for REA, and then they cannot apply to any other school under ED, and there's also restrictions on how many schools a student can apply to early action, if any. The biggest difference though is that REA is non-binding. So if you are thinking about a application deadline that is early decision or restrictive early action, talk with your counselor first just to make sure that you know what that really means and then how that's going to impact the rest of your application plan. And then with non-restrictive application plans, the biggest difference between these 3 is really with their deadlines. So for early action, the deadline is typically around November 1st or 15th. Some schools might have an early action too, which their deadlines could be around December. And then notification typically comes around maybe January time, but way before the regular decision comes out. And then with regular decision for state and private schools, those deadlines is anywhere from January 1st to mid-April, and then the decisions typically come out around March or maybe like in around May time if it's a later deadline. And then with rolling decisions, what that means is that if a school offers a rolling admission rather, they will review applications as they are submitted and then send out decisions throughout the application cycle. So this can go all the way past April, past May, into June. And then one final deadline note is the California State Universities, or the UCs, their deadline is November 30th, and even though that's very early compared to the other in-state school, other colleges, that is their regular decision deadline. And now we'll go to Mrs. Rice.
Okay, well now I'm thinking about ice cream, so forgive me if I'm throwing off a lot. Okay, all right. Okay, this is a lot of information, right? We're going to get through it. We're going to be all right. So here's the thing with our application procedure. Our office every year processes over 3,000 transcript requests. So we have to have some policies and procedures in place to make sure that everybody's documents meet their deadline, arrive at their schools. We want to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. So we are giving you this information tonight. We will continue to give this information to students in the classroom in a couple different ways that I'm going to highlight. So the first thing is, as you start to look at your application procedures and start reading your application material, you will recognize that one of the things is you filling out the application, but then it's also school information, right? We have to send your transcripts, we have to send your letters of recommendation, and all of our school forms. We require a sit-down meeting with your student in order to process this information. We have some forms that we fill out. These are not handed out to anyone. You have to have a sit-down meeting with your counselor in order to fill these out together, okay? This is when we ask things like, what are the schools, what are the deadlines, where we make sure your information and score is correct. We have that meeting, and then we will pass the information on to our registrar, who then makes sure that all documents are sent to your schools, okay? Feel free to jump in if I'm forgetting anything over there. One thing that is in all students' score accounts in their My Drive is something called the parent brag sheet. When we are writing our counselor evaluation, we love to hear from families. Nobody loves your babies like you do. And a lot of times when students are filling out their own bio survey, it's difficult, right? It's hard to talk about ourselves. A lot of times students will even sit down with us and say, well, what do you want to know? I mean, there's nothing, I'm normal, I'm just average. It's hard to talk about ourselves. And so we love it when parents can say, you know, he probably sat with you and didn't mention all these X, Y, Z wonderful things about him. And so that is really helpful for us. And so, again, those are in score. There are hard copies in our office your students can pick up and bring home to you as well. When they do come to that meeting to officially request their transcripts, they can bring that with them then. You can scan them and email them, whatever way is comfortable for you. And again, after tonight, we are going to be telling all of the students this information again next week in all of the English classes. We will go over the timeline, applications, the procedures, all of the guidelines that we have to make sure that everybody's documents are processed, okay? Let's see. All right. So the formal transcript request